Okay, so welcome to another episode of Ask a Speechy, where we invite professional, expert, successful people, all related to dyslexia, and we ask them your question. It's quite simple. You can go on a website and submit your question, and we will basically put them to our next guest. If you haven't done so, you can go on a website at dystech.com.au/askaspeechy, submit your question, and we will make sure to include them in our next episode. I'm really excited about today's guest. Ashraf is a specialist education consultant at Spelled Victoria. He holds a master's degree in education and educational leadership from Monash University and a double diploma of dyslexia teaching and training from the University of Cambridge in the UK. Based in Melbourne, Australia, he presents a wide variety of workshops where his presentation style has been described as clear, engaging, and fun. And I can testify this because I went to Ashraf's workshop for 3 full days and it was amazing. Previously, Ashraf spent the last 14 years teaching and coaching students with learning difficulties in Singapore at the Dyslexia Association of Singapore. His last role as the Director of Specialized Education Services has seen him taking the lead in various curriculum development projects, teacher training initiative, presenting in numerous local and international workshops, and collaborating with educators to implement initiatives in school to promote inclusivity for students with learning difficulty. Ashraf, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Thank you, Hugo. Nice, and thank you for the lovely introduction. And I must say, I'm very impressed that with the work that you are doing as well with Dystech, and in doing the work that you do, traveling around the world now, sharing with people the work that you have done. And I particularly, of course, like the app that you have developed to enable us to, in fact, reach out to and identify more dyslexics and dysgraphics, people who have difficulties with reading and writing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, just basic things. Obviously, the world is really having a hard time at the moment, and I want to know how you're doing. And I know that you've told me that you've improvised an office at your house. So how's everything going? How's COVID treating you? And how's life so far?
Yeah. I mean, when COVID first hit, it was quite tough for us because we had to really shut down the office, and of course we had to quickly innovate our service to make sure that we continue to be able to support the students who needed support, and to deliver the training programs to our teachers, because all of them are actually entering a new environment whereby they are almost expected to be able to deliver support to our dyslexic students on an online sort of environment. So one of the first few things that we did was what you are seeing now, in fact, and experiencing, is to be able to convert everything that we have, our workshop, the 3-day workshop that you have attended, to an online sort of platform. And again, that's no mean feat, because with face-to-face, you are able to relate better to your participants, you're able to do activities a lot easier. And again, some of those things you are not able to do online. So you need to think about so many things around interactivity in terms of making sure that our participants don't fall asleep listening to you. And that's always a challenge. But I think we have managed to nail that. We have conducted so many of our introduction to SLDs now. And we are glad to have seen so many of the teachers around Victoria, and in fact from other states as well, respond to our workshops. And that just reflects the sort of need that is there. That teachers are hungry for this sort of information when it comes to identifying students with learning disorders and how to go about supporting them. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think the work that you guys are doing is really amazing, and it's good that you guys have managed to adopt the forced online revolution, I would say. And just to go further than that point, and talking about teacher and school, we all start our life in school, right? And so we've received a couple of questions, and some of them are actually really related to school, and and one question is, of course there's teacher, but as a school principal, right, who main goal is student success and well-being in the school.
Yep.
In your experience, how can they make their school more dyslexic friendly?
That's a good question, and a common question that I get from school principals attending our workshops as well. And of course, I'm relatively quite new to Melbourne, and during my stay here, I was really impressed with schools like Bentley West, who've managed to successfully done a good job in terms of supporting all learners, not just students with learning disorders. And I think one of the first few things that a school principal can look into in making their schools more dyslexia friendly in a way is number one, teacher education. Yeah, in making sure that all teachers are properly trained in knowing what learning disorders are, how to identify students who are struggling, knowing how to differentiate a student who has a learning difficulty versus someone with a learning disorder, in making sure teachers know things like the science of reading. Yeah, because now technology has advanced to the point that we are able to look into the brain and understand how the brain actually learns to read. So understanding that all teachers understand how that mechanism works does help them to make better choices in the classroom, and therefore learning the critical or effective teaching approaches that not only works for students with learning disorders, but also all students when it comes to reading, writing, and spelling. And also in introducing processes and looking into a system in their school that would also enable them to detect through regular assessments students who are struggling, so that they are able to give them the support either in small groups or in one-on-one in a timely manner. So I'm talking about the RTI, the response to intervention approach that some schools are already implementing. So those are some of the few things. So number one, teacher PD. Number two, then followed by making sure that teachers are well knowledge when it comes to the science of reading and what have you, implementing evidence-based instruction in their school, and introducing a system that enables the school to be able to respond to the needs of students who are struggling in their learning.
Yeah. So from what I get from this, it's really a 360 approach where we need to make sure that the teachers are empowered with the knowledge to put in place proper support, but the school itself also need to have a proper environment for the teacher to be comfortable in this environment, and having proper process to work all together and facilitate that.
Yeah. And if I can just add, Hugo, and especially it gets a bit complicated as a child grows older. So if I'm looking at supporting students who are in high school, for example, whereby I think friends become important in the child's life. So empowering the whole school population and getting them to understand what dyslexia is, what learning disorders are, that will actually go a long way in supporting students and also removing the stigma of dyslexia from the students themselves, and thereby making them comfortable and making them more willing to say that they are struggling in a particular area of academia, rather than just keeping it to themselves and saying that, oh, I'm different, my friends are smart, I'm stupid, and they are not willing to speak up because they are afraid that they might be looked down upon by their friends or even their teachers. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's a great point, because it is also something, the stigma and not being able to be sort of socially involved, and that's a really good point. And some of the thing that you've mentioned, we actually have a follow-up question on this, which is, as a teacher, and I know obviously this will require probably a full day minimum to explain, but if you could, based on your experience, as a teacher, what are the teaching approach that a teacher could learn to support a student with dyslexia?
Right. And again, that's a good question there, because there's a lot of teaching approaches out there. So the question is, which one is useful to support someone with dyslexia, be it in a whole class or in small groups or one-on-one, right? So at the core of successful literacy intervention for struggling students and for those with reading disabilities or disorders would be instruction that is highly explicit and systematic. In what areas? In the areas of decoding and spelling, because those are the areas that typically our students with dyslexia are having difficulties with. Okay. So what is this? This would be in areas like phonemic awareness and phonics, right? That would cover sufficiently decoding and spelling. What does explicit mean? Explicit means that the teacher is able to clearly explain and model key skills with well-chosen examples, right? It goes to the whole notion of I do, we do, and you do. Yeah, so I explain the teaching part, where the teacher is able to teach and clearly model some of these key skills. Then the teacher goes on to providing the students with adequate practice, together, so that it builds proficiency and confidence before releasing that responsibility to the kids. And that is the you do bit, whereby they get the students to practice on their own, right? So there's two things there. One is the content, which is decoding and spelling. The other one would be the teaching approach of teaching something explicitly and in a systematic manner. Now, students with dyslexia typically have significant difficulties with this area called phonemic awareness, PA for short. And phonemic awareness is actually the ability for an individual to be able to consciously identify individual sounds in words. So, for example, if I were to ask you, Hugo, what are the sounds that you hear in the word cat, right? You would say k, a, t. Now, so that ability would be your ability to be able to consciously know that there's actually three sounds in the word cat, and the sounds are k, a, t. Now, phonemic awareness does extend beyond just identification of sounds. It goes into your ability to blend the sounds together, segment the sounds like what I did just now, and to manipulate sounds as well. So, for example, again, in the word cat, change k to what do you get? You get mat.
Right.
That's right. So that goes into the ability of the child to be able to do that all in their heads, right? Because that is an area of difficulty. Now, all beginning readers will benefit. The good news is all beginning readers will benefit from instruction in phonemic awareness. Yeah. So it's easy for actually teachers to start including instruction on phonemic awareness, especially in the prep year. They do this quite a lot. But I think what we need to know is that difficulties with phonemic awareness is central to many cases of dyslexia, and this may be an area that requires particular emphasis during the intervention for these children. Other than that, students with dyslexia will also benefit from explicit teaching in other components of literacy like vocabulary, comprehension, and writing. So there's quite a few things that I've mentioned there: explicit teaching, systematic teaching, not only in the areas of phonics and phonemic awareness, also in other areas like vocabulary, comprehension, writing. On top of that, just to build on what I've said, again, like what you say, it actually needs about a day to cover this, but I'll just cover this very quickly. The teacher will also do, and this is quite crucial for fluency, because there's the area which they need to work on. They need to give students many opportunities for practice, to respond, to practice what they are learning, and for the teacher to be able to give them clear, prompt, and constructive feedback. It's in a very safe and meaningful way, so that the child does not feel that, oh, I'm stupid now for making this mistake, but they feel, okay, this is what I need to do. This is the mistake. I will try to correct it and move on. So these are just some of the key things that you need to take note of. Other than that, it will be constant monitoring of progress so that you know where the kids are, and that would actually enable you to be able to adjust your instruction to either slow down or to speed up, because that's quite key in what makes a successful intervention for our students with dyslexia.
And it's really interesting because one previous guest that we had, he's an educational psychologist in the US, and he said exactly what you've mentioned, where he said, give praise to the attempt, whether it's right or wrong. Make sure the child is okay with attempting something. What's fascinating is that obviously when I went to your workshop and actually learn about, how do we teach how to read? Because, the work at Dystech, we really focus on the scientific publication, on, dyslexia and all that sort of things. But when it comes to actually teaching reading, I realized that, teaching someone how to read is very complex, and there's multiple layer, and certain skills needs to come before other. And so it's a whole, it's a whole science, and it's a whole world on itself.
Yep, precisely. Which is why I think one of the things which I mentioned earlier was that instruction needs to be systematic, right? So you need to start, we need to begin with something which is simple, easy to understand before we go on to something which is a bit more complex. Absolutely, Hugo. Wonderful.
Absolutely. And based on what you've just said, at what age can we actually start making an impact for a child? What age can we start putting in place some support for a child to be successful in literacy?
Yep. So typically, when we are looking at the diagnosis age for dyslexia, let's start with that. When can we start typically diagnosing a child to have dyslexia? So the advice that we would normally give to parents is that once the child enters school, as early as year 1, then perhaps some sort of assessment can be done and the diagnosis can be made. Why school age? The reason why school age is recommended is because one of the criteria for diagnosis is the provision of at least 6 months of intervention that's evidence-based, right? So typically, parents or families would have access to this evidence-based instruction once they enter school, which is why that is recommended. There's also the other aspects of making sure that the child is properly developed alongside the other peers, and it is done at a developmentally appropriate age for diagnosis to be done. Having said that, we don't actually need to wait for a diagnosis before being able to deliver intervention or good instruction. As long as we are able to see that the child is struggling in reading, right? They may be at risk of dyslexia, but let's not put the tag of dyslexia too early on a child. And if we observe that the child is struggling in reading, writing, and spelling as compared to their peers, we can actually start putting in place the necessary support in those areas which I mentioned earlier. So you can start those explicit teaching in phonics as well as phonemic awareness once we are starting to see that they're beginning to struggle. So as early as the prep year, or even as early as 5 years old, we can actually start that work with students.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So in this way, So in this way, the children will not be burdened by this feeling of failure. So we are trying to avoid them experiencing failure at such an early age, which may actually influence their attitude towards learning in general, and that's what I am personally afraid of. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's true, often we have discussion and like, putting support in place do not kill everyone and can only be good for everyone. And that's a great point that you said, which is, we don't have to wait for a full diagnosis to help a child. And if you think about this, ethically, we should not wait. We should just help the child. The diagnosis is just a piece of paper, right? Like, if someone fall on the ground, you're not going to wait to have like, what's the diagnosis of it? You go and sort of help out that person, right?
Exactly, precisely, Hugo. Wonderful analogy. Yeah, exactly.
Great. And so, look, Ashraf, I want to go on the other side of life, right? We're a kid, we're an adolescent, we're an adult, we become old, and we're dyslexic. People with dyslexia, it's a lifelong condition, and it impacts people's life throughout their whole life. And I want to go towards something that's not really talked about, which is adult, right? I'm an adult. I have dyslexia, and there's many people like me, and obviously when you go into the working life with dyslexia, you have some challenges, right? regardless of you having received support or not, you still have dyslexia, and it will still impact your day-to-day life to some extent. And so I guess the question would be, from a management perspective, what are the things that a management team can put in place to support adults in a workplace with dyslexia? What are some, because obviously now we live in a world that are so much connected. We can learn so fast. We can go on the internet, learn so many things. We can see that now more and more companies become more transparent. There's much more effort and money poured into inclusivity, making sure that everyone has the same opportunity as everyone else. So I'd like your view on this. As a manager, what are some things that I can put in place to empower staff that have potentially dyslexia in the workplace?
I think that the first area that you need to look at will be your own mindset as how you view dyslexic learners or people with dyslexia. So back in Singapore, one of the few responsibilities that I have and really an honor of doing is actually to lead this committee of alumni, and these are our ex-students who have attended our classes at the DAS, who have now grown up and started working. Some of them are in the final year of the university and things like that. So what I can tell you from the experience is that I've never seen a more diverse, talented bunch of people working together. Why? Because in that group, I have an architect, I have an engineer, I have a person who is looking into the Internet of Things, and this would be the things that you are using now in terms of Alexa and your Google and your stuff like that. I have a Rhodes Scholar who is now in Oxford doing a double master's in business and data science.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. I did mention it. I have a doctor on board. I have an engineer as well. So all working together in a very fantastic way. So again, and just look at yourself, Hugo, looking at machine learning and putting technology in a place where it becomes so useful to the community and the society at large. And these are, I think, the skills that employers are able to tap on if they're able to see people with dyslexia for their strengths, because definitely the strengths at that age sometimes will outweigh their areas of weakness, right? So 2 years ago, actually, I came across this report from the UK. It's called the Westminster Achievability Commission. Yeah, so they found out that there's a lot of evidence of systemic barriers to the employment of millions of potential employees in the UK who are neurodivergent. Yeah, so neurodivergent is essentially people with who actually learn and process information a bit differently. In this case, would be people with dyslexia, right? So the issue which they highlighted were a few. So number one, they highlighted a widespread lack of awareness of what dyslexia is.
Right.
A lack of government support, workplace discrimination, and job application processes that are not too friendly for dyslexic learners or people with dyslexia. So in this case, it could be getting the person with dyslexia, the applicant, to fill in a long form that is difficult to understand with no text-to-speech sort of function. So that in fact hampers just the application process of someone who is potentially talented, who could potentially make or break your organization, right? So they found that 43% of the people interviewed felt discouraged from just applying.
Wow,
and another
that's crazy.
52%, another 52% actually claimed that they have experienced some form of discrimination during the interview or the selection processes. So that is kind of like, okay, an area that we need to work on. Yeah. So if an employer or a manager is looking at supporting people with dyslexia, they could be looking at a few things. Number one, increasing the awareness of specific learning disorders, aka dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, among staff, amongst the organization so that reasonable adjustments can be put in place from the start, not from the middle of employment, but from the start of employment, so that we can give them the necessary technology or the assistance, the adjustments. So we could put in place text-to-speech softwares and stuff like that so that they're able to communicate more effectively, removing the barriers that's being posed by their condition, right? So you could get them to use devices like smart pens during meetings, giving them a quiet room to avoid distractions, giving them extra time to do paperwork. We give students extra time in school, but because of this lack of awareness, we think that dyslexia is somehow miraculously evaporated or cured by the time they hit the workplace. But no, they still may require extra time to do things like paperwork. They could look other things they could look at would be things like a screening process, putting in place a screening process at the recruitment and training stages to make sure that our applicants or our employees with dyslexia are given the right sort of support right from the start. Yeah. Another idea which I had and which I gave was organization forming support groups for people with dyslexia. Yeah, because they don't. Then in that way, they are amongst people who face similar difficulties, and they can share good strategies that work for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Most importantly, organizations will need to understand that there's no one size fits all sort of strategy. The support given needs to be bespoke and specific to the individual needs because their roles are different. It's not like school, whereby you go through school, you go through similar subjects, and you could give a general support. But in this case, as an adult, your roles are different, your responsibilities are different. So the support that is given needs to be individualized and catered to the needs of the individual as well. Yeah.
That's so much great advice, actually, and a lot of them I haven't thought of about having this company widespread awareness and having those support group within organizations, and one thing that we've put in place at Dystech, and obviously half of the team is dyslexic, and we are a remote team, so communication is our lifeline, right? We have to document everything, we have to tell everyone what we're doing so that everyone can sort of work together. And one thing that I found really useful, and I think I said this in previous episode, is that it's all about medium of communication. So you can share information by text, and then the recipient will read that. You can share information by audio recording, and people will listen to that. And on top of the recording, you can also share that as a video, which would be sound and image. And I've been involved recently with an organization called isgood.ai, which is a fantastic organization trying to use AI for good and better the world. And we've got a fairly large team, 30 plus people. And they, obviously when you have a team of 30 people, you're really likely to have at least one or two dyslexic in the team, right? It's very, very likely. Yeah. And now with the technology that we have, it's really easy to communicate information throughout multiple medium. For example, you can write down your documentation and you can just record your face and read it and put a video as well. And that doesn't require much time. And we found this to be extremely useful because all your team can use whatever they prefer to receive the information and indirectly make everything so much productive when you onboard employee. Onboarding process can be really tricky. It could be a lot of information to sink in. And so, and as well with what you've mentioned, I think that it's something we should work on.
Yeah, exactly, Hugo. And I think you actually mentioned a very good point there, and it reminded me about this point about the universal design for learning. Right. Yeah. So this key concept that makes learning or work accessible to not just the learning disordered person, but to all learners as well. So by making and implementing the strategies that you have implemented, it's making the whole workplace more inclusive for everyone, because everyone would have a preference for a certain way of delivering information or receiving information. And if we make those avenues available, then we are making information as available as possible to everyone. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great point. And so now it's more on a personal sort of feeling or observation, I would say. I mean, you've got a fantastic amount of experience, and you've seen different country, you've seen different communities, and you've helped teacher, and you've helped parent, and you've helped professional. And I want to know, in your view, in your experience and observation, what are the main challenges you see for dyslexic today in society? Now that's a deep question, I know, but if you could let us know what you think those challenges are.
Well, Hugo, I'm actually a cup half full kind of person. So I actually see that there's actually a lot of opportunities that's been made available for the person with dyslexia to succeed now more than ever. And this is because of the rampant and exponential increase in the use of technology today, especially in the last 6 to 8 months with COVID being hit, where everybody, whether you like it or not, whether you are a technology dinosaur, you are being forced to go online and make sure you're comfortable with the use of technology. Yeah. So what technology does is that it actually allows our students with dyslexia, our people who have dyslexia, to compete on an even playing field with the rest. Right? That's what it allows. So with the use of the different apps, the softwares, the devices that allows an individual with dyslexia to learn, study, and communicate more effectively, it actually levels this playing field that I'm talking about. So, and nowadays our understanding of dyslexia is even now more in depth. It's more in depth more than ever because of the use of fMRI, which is the functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. And it allows us to, in fact, just number one, understand how we are learning to read and write. It also actually allows us to understand which strategies work and which strategies don't. Right? Yeah. So, which is why this whole thing about the science of reading and the strategies that work with early readers is now in the picture now. Is quite hot. It's quite a hot topic in education. And of course, not forgetting the sort of apps that you're developing. It has made identification so much easier and detection a lot quicker, so that these students are able to receive the help that they need, and they're able to do it themselves. They don't really now need a teacher, or now parents can do it in the comfort of their own home to detect students who may be potentially at risk of reading disability. The true challenge to me is actually on how schools, organizations, society is able to leverage on this advancement in technology, research, to make changes in their processes, their thinking, their mindsets, in terms of how they assess, also how they teach, support all learners, so that all of their students, their learners, their employees are not excluded or disadvantaged. To me, that is the challenge. Not on the dyslexic, but it's actually on the society, on how they are able to utilize and leverage on what's available now to include everyone. Now, that is to me the challenge. Yeah.
yeah, that's great. I think, you know what? I think I agree with you. I think that now, better than ever, we live in a world where, well, first of all, knowledge has become a commodity.
Yeah.
If you want to learn how to grow strawberry, you can go on YouTube, and the chances are that 5 minutes later, you'll be able to get started. Obviously, I'm not talking about physical scientist or someone who would work in a nuclear plant with deep PhD details, but you can learn much easily than before. And like you said, we now have all the technology available for us, most of it for free, to sort of empower ourselves and become super-powered human in some sort, right?
Yes.
And I think you're right. I think that, and I'd always make this analogy, and people are gonna get bored of it, but that's what I truly think is that if you can make something tangible, people will start caring about it. And for us, the main thing for us and the work that we do at Dystech is how do we make dyslexia tangible? And hopefully, if people can really realize that there is a lot of kids with dyslexia, there's a lot of adults with dyslexia, there's a lot of negative impact from all level, from the economical level of society. You can have a budgeting discussion and say, how much does dyslexia cost? You can have this discussion. You can also have the discussion of, well, how dyslexia impact communities, and how dyslexia impact families, and how dyslexia impact the individual. So really, if you pick any level of discussion, you will be able to sort of have some argument saying, we need to do something about this. And I think you're 100% right. It is for us, in my view, it's the challenge for us today, which is, let's talk about this and do something about it.
Let's change. What does it take for society to change in terms of their mindsets and their willingness to change their behavior to be able to make learning and working more inclusive for everyone.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've worked 14 something years in Singapore, and you've got a lot of experience in the Singaporean community, and I'm sure or around Asia as well. And now you've been using your expertise here in Australia to help people in Australia. And I want to ask you, what are the differences between the two? Have you seen some noticeable differences between Australia and Singapore, whether it is government funding, whether it is how school operate, whether it is how the community react when they face dyslexia? If you could share, like, what are some of the key differences, and if there is no differences, what are the similarities that you've observed?
Yeah, I think a good place to start to answer that question would be school, right? There are, of course, some noticeable differences between the Singaporean school and the Australian school. Some of this, the things I'm going to mention, has been mentioned earlier in terms of the sort of recommendations I've made to principals, because from my experience, yes, kind of worked quite well in Singapore. So in Singapore, number one, RTI, the response to intervention sort of framework, is implemented in all schools. Yeah, so it's top down. So the Ministry of Education has identified that they wanted to implement the RTI sort of approach some 10, 15 years ago. So they send their staff to the United States to learn this approach and come back and implement this thing in all of the schools. So what's happening in Singapore is that now all schools entering year one, or what we call primary one over there, needs to go through a systematic screening process at the start of the year called the P1 School Readiness Test, to determine whether they are struggling in the areas of literacy or numeracy. So if they are, then these students will be given small group support in groups of about 6 to 8 students. Yeah. And if these students continue to be facing difficulties at primary 3 or in year 3, they will be given one-on-one support in this program called the School-Based Dyslexia Remediation Program. Yeah, that's what they call it now. And for the other levels, if, of course, you have a diagnosis of dyslexia, then they will go to the DAS, the Dyslexia Association of Singapore, for support. So the DAS, which is a non-profit, works very closely with the Ministry of Education in the delivery of this support, in the delivery of professional education to teachers, which is why I think it's quite successful in that respect. Because the Dyslexia Association of Singapore, having run programs for many decades now, they are in a position to be able to craft out a training program that is very practical in nature, that works with our dyslexic students. So in that manner, the DAS receives funding from the ministry for both teacher education as well as supporting students with literacy needs. Yeah. Other than that, the not so good side, I suppose, or in Singapore is again the emphasis on exams. Yeah.
Okay.
So the good thing about and what I like about Australia is again students are given the time and space to learn, and there's only one major exam in Victoria, and that's the VCE at the end of year 12. So students are able to have the time, the necessary time to pick up the skills of reading without having or being burdened by the pressure of exams. So in contrast, Singapore students will need to go through a major exam at the end of year 6. So in fact, their future is determined that early. And from there,
Right.
again, the next one would be at the end of year 10. And again at year 12, which is the O level, the GCSE O level at the age of about 16, 17. And then the A levels, if you decide to go to the junior colleges, where you take your A levels. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in contrast, in Victoria, you only need to sit for one, and that is the VCE.
Yeah. Wow.
But to me, what is the game changer is that in Australia, all occupations have an equal status. Yeah, so it affects that. That has a profound effect at the society level, you know. So all occupations are seen to be professionals. So if you're a sparky, you are not to say it is a lesser occupation. If you are a bricklayer, no, that's in fact that earns you quite a lot of money. If you're sparky, you earn quite a lot of money. In fact, in Singapore, that's not the case. So if you work as an electrician, no, that is not really a highly regarded occupation.
Yes.
It brings you less money and things like that. Yeah. So that has an impact on our students with dyslexia, right? Because not all
Absolutely.
of them are academically inclined, right?
Yeah.
So if they prefer a hands-on sort of occupation, then in a way they are disadvantaged, and at the same time they may not be seen as to be on par from a society perspective as a doctor or a teacher or an engineer. You see, so that again feeds into the social stigma of being a dyslexic and having a learning disorder. So Singapore is trying to do something about this by removing exams, by changing the way in which they assess students. You know, not only through pen and paper, but projects and stuff like that. But we still have a long way to go. But I think this is the place where Australia is actually ahead of Singapore. So that's an advantage there. And that's also the fact, the fact that because of this, there's a lot more career options in Australia. So you can become a vet, you can study to become a vet, you can study to become a sparky, you can study to become anything, an actor, an actress, theatre studies. So there's so much variety in terms of what you can study. And again, you can be anything you want and you can still succeed here. But in Singapore, it's very economic driven. So even in terms of the educational choices that you make. Yeah.
That's a really good point. That's a great observation of the two, and that's a really good point that you've made, which is something that you really need to be well aware of the landscape in order to sort of make this observation. That's really fascinating, and I'm sure in other like we work with people in the UK as well, and they have a very strong, active dyslexic community over there as well. Very, very active. They have all sorts of conference, and we've actually published a scientific publication in one of their conference for next year, and they're really active. And the US as well, and it's really fascinating to see. Like all those people want the same thing, and they're coming from a different background with different social economic landscape, with different number of exam, and it's great to see that there are still people working regardless of the landscape towards making society better. And obviously, life is not easy, and so we all have
Life is
to,
not easy.
go through some challenges. Ashraf, that was amazing. Now, what I want to ask you is, for the people who see this, is where can people find you? Because I'm sure there'll be people wanting to attend your workshop, or I don't know, send you an email saying, "Wow, that was amazing what you said." I don't know. Where can people find you?
Well, the first go-to place is actually our website. That's speltvic.org.au, or you can actually find us on Facebook. Yeah, you can find out what the latest courses are and the other services that we provide. So the other main service that we provide to the community would be our assessment services, and we do have a team of highly trained, well-trained educational psychologists who would be able to assess students for learning disorders. So if you are seeking for assessment services, or if you are just a parent or a teacher wanting to find out more about learning disorders and finding out more on how to support students with learning disorders so that your child can succeed, then do come to us. Visit our website at speltvic.org.au.
Awesome. Ashraf, thank you so much for your time. That was such a useful conversation. I've learned so much, and I'm sure a lot of people will. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Hugo, for having me here. And again, good luck to you and Dystech in the work that you guys are doing. You guys are doing an amazing job in making screening more available for the common people who is not so familiar with dyslexia or dysgraphia, and making that process a lot easier and simpler.
Amazing. Thanks, Ashraf.
Yes.